They brought everyone out to the range that afternoon, not because there was training scheduled, but because there was curiosity. Senior Chief Marcus Haldane stood with his arms folded, jaw tight, telling the younger guys to watch the show. The smirks moved through the crowd like wind. Nobody said her name at first. They just said her. Arya Holt walked to the firing line with a calm that almost irritated them. A few whispered that she was only here because Intel wanted to try a gimmick. Someone laughed under his breath. She didn't turn, didn't answer, didn't defend herself. She simply checked the rifle like it was something alive. Haldane gave the signal, and the targets rolled farther than anyone expected, farther than they used for guests. Farther than most men on that range were comfortable admitting. Arya adjusted her stance, breathed, and pressed the trigger. The steel rang. Clean. Perfect. And somehow the silence afterward felt colder than any miss would have. No cheers. No approval. Only the quiet sense that everyone was waiting for the moment she finally failed, because that was the story they already believed. Out beyond the range, a storm was building, and a mission that would test all of them was coming fast. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to FOB Veteran Stories, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Arya Holt arrived at the forward base with a quietness that made people underestimate her before she ever opened her mouth. Early 30s, lean, sun-marked, she didn't look like the prototype people expected when they heard the word sniper. There was no swagger, no easy humor, none of the loud confidence that filled most ready rooms. She carried herself like someone who had learned a long time ago that attention rarely did anyone favors. She had grown up in the New Mexico desert, the kind of place where silence was not empty but full of small signals, wind scraping over rocks. A distant truck, coyotes calling on far ridges. That landscape had taught her patience before pride and discipline before noise. Out there, missing the first time meant you simply sat longer. You did not blame the wind. You adjusted, learned, and tried again. The Navy noticed that about her early. She listened more than she spoke. She absorbed instructions as if every word might matter later. Over time, she became exactly the kind of shooter commanders trusted when things were complicated and visibility was poor. Eventually, that path brought her here, reassigned as Overwatch support for a SEAL element that did not ask for her, did not want her, and did not hide it. Around the base, she was described in short phrases that said more about the speakers than about her. New project. Intel experiment. Different approach. Nobody called her teammate. Nobody called her by rank. They called her an asset, like she was a piece of gear that might or might not work when things got ugly. She carried something worse than doubt, though. She carried memory. A convoy rescue. Too much chaos. Too many shifting variables. A sandstorm that swallowed sight, sound, and good decision-making. Her spotter, the friend who trusted her judgment without question, went forward to help wounded Marines while she stayed on Overwatch, believing she could protect him with her rifle. She saved lives that day. The reports said so. The after-action analysis praised her, but her friend did not come back. Officially, it was not her fault. Unofficially, she had never forgiven herself. She did not talk about it. She did not ask anyone to understand. She simply worked harder and spoke less, as if enough discipline might one day rewrite the past. It never did, but she kept trying anyway. Lieutenant Commander Reeves was the first person on the base to treat her like a professional instead of a theory. He reviewed her record, asked careful questions, and listened to the way she broke down problem sets. He supported her assignment to the team, not because he wanted to make a statement, but because he believed that complicated problems sometimes required uncomfortable solutions. Still, he watched closely. Responsibility demanded it. Chief Warrant Officer Brennan, the intel man, trusted her even sooner. He saw how she pulled weather reports, topographic maps, and satellite stills into one mental picture. He recognized the way she filtered noise, discarding everything that did not affect the mission. To him, she wasn't a gamble. She was a precision tool finally being used correctly. Senior Chief Marcus Haldane did not see it that way. To him, risk was risk, and outsiders rarely earned trust before bleeding with the team. He had spent too many years burying operators to get excited about change. When he looked at Aria Holt, he didn't see silent competence. He saw unnecessary variables. The younger SEALs took their cues from him, and their tone settled somewhere between curiosity and quiet hostility. The joke started small, a muttered line about special treatment, a sarcastic comment about sniper magic, a chuckle when she walked into a room and the conversation shifted without anyone saying why. She never answered, never bit back. She let the words flow past as if they had nothing to grab onto. That restraint came from habit. When someone asked her something pointed, she counted her breaths, 1, 2, 3, before replying. It kept emotion from spilling where judgment needed to live. It made her voice steady even when the subject hurt. It also convinced some men that she simply did not have a backbone. They were wrong, of course. Backbone does not always announce itself. She went through days of rehearsals, briefings, drills, and rifle maintenance without asking for help or attention. She stood quietly through long mission planning sessions while maps filled with colored markers. When Haldane dismissed her input, she made notes and refined her work rather than arguing. When Kershaw cracked a joke about training wheels on her rifle, she inspected the bolt and said nothing at all. There were small hints that something deeper lived under the surface. The way she traced terrain features without looking down, as if she carried the map in her bones. The way she positioned herself automatically, where she could see exits and angles. The way her shoulders never tensed, even when tension rolled through the room like static. At night, when the cafeteria went quiet and laughter had already thinned out into the hallways, she would sit with a mug of cooling coffee and a cleaning kit spread on the table. The rifle became ritual. Cloth, oil, slow passes. Every part handled like a memory rather than an object. She never rushed. She never left a job unfinished. Some of the men watched her through doorways. They saw a woman who didn't flinch, who didn't brag, who didn't crack under pressure. And somehow, instead of earning respect, that made them suspicious. They mistook calm for detachment and discipline for coldness. In a community built on shared hardship, they believed they could not trust someone they did not fully understand. By the end of most evenings, the ready rooms filled again with noise and banter. Haldane laughed with his men in the corner. Kershaw reenacted stories barely true. Someone cranked a song up too loud. In that chorus of easy camaraderie, Aria gathered her kit, slung her rifle case, and slipped quietly out into the corridor. The laughter followed her down the hallway, not cruel, just careless. The kind of laughter that forgets who might hear it. She walked past the bulletin boards and the peeling paint, past doors with names and inside jokes taped to them, toward a barracks room that felt as orderly and empty as the rest of her life. And for a moment before she closed the door, the silence around her sounded heavier than any storm. The briefing room always felt smaller when the weather map turned red. Storm icons crawled across the screen, layered over a village name most of them had never heard before that morning. The intel slides were sharp, cold, and unforgiving. 4 American contractors taken hostage by a cell leader with a reputation for staged executions and propaganda videos. The timing was brutal. A major sandstorm was already building, and once it fully rolled in, drones and air support would be all but blind. Reeves stood at the front, pointer resting against the map. His voice stayed calm, but nobody missed the tension under it. The window for action was tight. They needed precision, speed, and luck was rarely dependable. Haldane leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying the compound layout with an expression that suggested none of it surprised him. He had seen variations of this problem too many times. His instinct was the same as it had always been. Hit hard, hit fast, force the enemy to react. He said as much, outlining a direct assault route that cut through alleyways to reach the main building. Casualties were possible, maybe likely, but acceptable in his calculus. Brennan cleared his throat and shifted the briefing toward an alternate path. He highlighted the high ground north of the village, a ridge with wide observation lines that most planners had overlooked due to distance. He explained that the incoming storm would make normal sniping nearly impossible, except they had someone with experience working under those conditions. His eyes moved, almost casually, to Arya. There was a beat of silence, followed by the sound of a chair leg scraping. Haldane didn't snap, didn't raise his voice, he just shook his head. Relying on one long gun in a storm? Relying on someone who had never bled with his team? He implied, without quite saying it, that the pressure would break her, that the moment things went sideways she would hesitate, and hesitation got people killed. Arya listened without interrupting. She studied the map, the angles, the approach routes. She traced the ridgeline mentally, calculating distances against terrain features. When Reeves eventually asked for her assessment, she spoke evenly. She believed the Overwatch plan could work. She had worked storms before. She understood the limitations. If they gave her the ridge, she could strip key defenses and buy the assault team's time. Kershaw chuckled from the back row. So she'll be spotting from a spa chair while we do the real work? A couple of heads tilted, waiting for reaction. Arya didn't take the bait. She simply folded her hands and looked back at the map. The grin on Kershaw's face widened. Mockery always grew when it wasn't challenged. The room went quiet for a second after that, not supportive quiet. The kind that fills a space when someone crosses a line and nobody moves to pull them back. What would you have done in that moment? Stayed quiet or stood up for her? Reeves didn't scold Kershaw. He didn't need to. He simply went back to the storm timing, back to contingencies, back to numbers that did not care about egos. The plans split into branches, Standard Assault and Overwatch-led Assault, each with risks highlighted in calm red markers. When the discussion wound down, he kept both options open, but everyone left the room knowing one thing clearly. If the storm accelerated, their best shot at bringing everyone home might come from the person they trusted least. That night, the base felt different. Winds picked up dust, rattling loose pieces of metal and turning the floodlights into hazy halos. Arya sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, cleaning her rifle with slow, practiced movements. Every pass of the cloth over the barrel carried echoes she could not stop, the roar of engines, the crackle of radios, the sudden silence when her spotter stopped answering. She did not cry over it anymore. She just listened to the memory, accepted it, and let it pass through. Sleep wasn't an option, so she went back to the range. The storm's outer bands had already arrived, and crosswinds played across the targets in strange, unpredictable patterns. She set up alone, moving with that unhurried efficiency people mistook for detachment. A few SEALs drifted out, arms folded, watching like spectators at a show they expected to end with embarrassment. Her first shots were steady, almost ordinary. Then she started pushing distance. She measured wind by ear, not flag. She tracked the rhythm of gusts the way musicians follow a beat. She closed her eyes briefly to feel the pressure shifts, then opened them again and sent the round. When the steel rang at a distance, most men refused to attempt in those conditions. Someone swore under his breath. She didn't change expression. She simply adjusted again and did it twice more. Instead of admiration, the explanation arrived instantly. Luck. Bad flags. Glitching targets. Somebody joked that even a broken clock gets it right twice a day. The laughter was forced, brittle, a sound meant to cover discomfort. The next afternoon, Reeves called her in alone. He didn't circle the subject. He asked about the convoy rescue. He asked about the spotter. He asked what went wrong. For a long moment, she stared at a blank spot on the wall. Then she told him the truth, the unvarnished version she never wrote into reports. She admitted she feared that, under pressure, the same mistake might happen again. That she might think she could control more than she actually could, and someone else would pay the price. Reeves listened, then leaned forward. "Courage isn't pretending it didn't happen," he said quietly. It's walking back into the same conditions and doing the job anyway." The words landed heavier than any reprimand. She nodded once. No promises. Just acknowledgement. Training intensified as the storm track tightened. Drills ran longer, radios crackled more often, and subtle tension spread through the teams. Still, Arya kept returning to the range, to the map room, to the quiet corners where she could work through numbers and angles without noise. Gradually, the laughter around her changed pitch. Shots that most shooters called coin flips started landing with unnerving regularity. She tracked moving targets as if they were predictable. She anticipated gusts seconds before they arrived. The instructors noticed first, then the operators. Whispered conversations began in hallways. Maybe she wasn't a gimmick. Maybe she had simply learned something they had not. Haldane still doubted, but even he grew cautious about how loudly he expressed it. The storm would decide the strategy, and if the storm came in as predicted, everyone in that room knew whose crosshairs might end up between the team and disaster. Nobody asked where Arya got her rifle case, and she never volunteered the story. It was older than most of the gear on the base, the fabric softened from years of wear. Inside the lining, stitched where only the owner would ever see, was a faded patch. The emblem belonged to an elite unit that had since been reorganized, the kind of place where mentorship mattered more than medals. The thread had frayed around the edges, but the symbol remained intact, like a reminder meant only for her. When she unzipped the case, her fingers brushed it without thinking, as if touching a memory before touching the weapon. Little details like that gathered around her the way dust gathers at the base of a wall. You didn't notice them at first. Then, once you did, you couldn't stop seeing them. During one pre-mission inspection, she rolled up her sleeves to wash away cleaning solvent at the sink. A thin scar crossed her wrist, almost delicate, as if someone had traced a line with broken glass. Most scars on that base came from explosions or shrapnel. This one looked different. Sharp, controlled, like a moment caught halfway between rescue and disaster. She tugged the sleeve back down without comment. Nobody asked, but 2 or 3 people remembered. The armorer, an older sergeant with the calm patience of someone who had seen every kind of shooter walk through his shop, took a closer look at her weapon one afternoon. He ran a finger over the trigger and raised his eyebrows slightly. The wear pattern was deep but precise, polished only at very specific contact points. That told him something. This wasn't casual range time. This was repetition honed to fractions, thousands of dry fires, each movement identical to the last. He said nothing, just nodded and handed the rifle back with the kind of respect that doesn't need words. Okonjo noticed things differently. He was a steady presence, not loud, not impressed by bravado. During another range session, he watched Arya close her eyes for a second right before firing. Not a blink, a pause, almost like a musician feeling for tempo. He watched again. Same thing. It wasn't superstition. It was deliberate, precise, unnervingly consistent. After the 3rd time, he asked quietly, "What are you doing there?" She shrugged, listening. That was the only explanation she gave. He didn't push, but it lingered in his mind. People began to realize she spent more time listening than looking. When others scanned rooms visually, she turned her head slightly, as if catching cues from somewhere else. Doors closing 2 halls away. The dull thud of rotor blades shifting pitch. The scratch of boots on gravel outside the operations building. It wasn't uncanny, just focused, and maybe a little unsettling. In briefings, when Reeves discussed timing and routes, Arya filled the margins of her map with small handwritten notes, not doodles. Not scribbles. Calculations. Arrows that showed how wind funneled through certain corridors. Curving lines mapping how noise would travel between buildings during high gusts. Estimates of echo delay based on wall material. Brennan saw those notes once, leaned in, and quietly exhaled. She wasn't just tracking targets, she was modeling the environment like a living system. When others zoned out during long intel updates, she sat perfectly still, absorbing. When someone repeated information, she caught inconsistencies immediately. Once, she corrected the projected approach speed of the storm by a handful of minutes based only on how the air pressure felt against her skin. Later, the meteorology feed confirmed she was right. Word of those moments didn't spread loudly. It moved the way rumors about haunted buildings move, slowly, quietly, through unfinished sentences. Kershaw, who had once joked the loudest, started joking less when she was in the room. He never admitted why. Maybe it was because she kept doing little things that didn't fit neatly inside his box labeled gimmick. Maybe it was because on the range, he missed shots she landed without comment. Whatever the reason, his grin held more caution now. Haldane noticed too, though he would never have said it out loud. He watched the way Reeves started relying on her assessments during rehearsals. He saw Brennan slide intel sheets toward her first. He saw Okonjo lingering near her firing position, not to supervise, but to learn. And that, more than anything else, bothered him. Teams worked on predictability. She was becoming an unpredictable asset. Late one evening, when the operations building was almost empty, Arya stayed behind studying satellite photographs. She traced rooftops, alleyways, and open courtyards. She marked likely sniper hides for the enemy, predicted fallback routes, and circled spots that felt wrong even before the analysts flagged them. There was no rush, no drama, only the steady, patient assembly of a plan. Have you ever seen someone quietly doing something extraordinary and nobody realized it yet? The day the storm truly arrived, the sky turned the color of old brass. Dust climbed upward instead of falling, smeared across the horizon in heavy strokes. The air tasted metallic. Men spoke louder than usual without realizing it, trying to be heard over a wind that had not yet crested. The meteorology feed stopped predicting and started warning. Within hours, surveillance drones were flying blind, their cameras filled with static haze and shifting curtains of grit. Operations slowed everywhere except in the planning room. Reeves stood over the map, jaw tight, as reports came in from reconnaissance teams. The hostages were still alive. Guards rotated in disciplined pairs. The cell leader had reinforced their perimeter and prepared fallback positions. Every minute lost increased the chance that the hostages would simply disappear into the storm forever. Arya waited near the back of the room, hands resting lightly on the table, listening. The storm pattern on the monitor wasn't just weather to her. It looked like a breathing thing, expanding, contracting, pulsing against the land. She studied the ridge to the north again, the long stone spine overlooking the compound. The distance was daunting even in perfect conditions. In this storm, it bordered on insanity. When there was a break in conversation, she spoke. "If we're going to attempt this, I want the northern ridge. 2,000 meters gives me angles you won't have up close. I can take heavy guns and overwatch movement." Haldane turned, expression hard. 2,000 in that? His voice cut through the room. That's not overwatch. That's wishful thinking. You won't see anything but dust. Reeves didn't answer immediately. He looked at the storm projection, then back at Arya. Can you work it? She didn't promise. She didn't puff her chest. She simply said, yes. If I can hear them, I can work them. The quiet that followed was different this time. Less derision, more calculation. Brennan nodded slowly. He had seen enough data points to believe there was something to what she said. Haldane shook his head again, but stopped short of outright refusal. In the end, Reeves gave the order. The plan would rely on her overwatch, with one chance to prove it viable. The team prepped in near darkness as the storm thickened. Sand hissed against walls. Loose cables rattled. The base smelled faintly of oil and static. Arya shouldered her pack and rifle and stepped into the storm as if walking into deep water. Within minutes, visibility shrank to a few arm lengths. Landmarks vanished. Only the compass and her pace count kept her oriented. The trek to the ridge was brutal. The wind shoved at her like a living thing. Sand crawled under goggles and into seams. Each breath scraped her throat raw. She moved low, steady, refusing to rush. The soundscape became her guide. The muted thrum of a generator from the village, the distant irregular clatter of loose sheet metal, the faint broken pattern of voices carried on gusts. Climbing the ridge was worse. The ancient rock cut into her palms. Gravel slid out from beneath her boots. By the time she reached the top, her shoulders burned and her hands shook from fatigue. She forced herself to slow down, to think. Storms punished impatience. She carved out a shallow nest, stacking stones to break the wind, shaping a pocket where her body and rifle could sit without being sandblasted. She went through calibrations by memory, knowing that optics would fog and thermals would ghost. She dialed corrections for wind she could barely see, trusting instead in what her ears told her about direction and force. Below, the village blurred into a shadow world. The assault teams moved out under cover of the storm, split into elements that ghosted through alleys and broken walls. Radio chatter stayed brief, tight, and professional. Every step risked collision with unseen enemies. Every doorway became a question mark. Bravo team advanced along the western side, hugging a wall that curved toward a courtyard. From the ridge, Arya listened. Wind rattled something metallic to their left. Boots scuffed. Then, faintly, too faintly for human eyes to track, she caught the quick double-tap rhythm of two men changing positions, the soft click of safeties, the tiny scrape of a rifle butt against brick. They were about to be flanked. "Bravo, freeze," she whispered into the radio. Haldane's reply came back sharp. "What do you have?" "2. Close. Close. Left angle. 5 meters beyond the corner." Nobody else saw anything. The storm erased depth. Thermals bloomed and vanished, confused by heat plumes and debris. Arya closed her eyes. The storm became a map. Wind carried sound like threads. Each step, each breath, each shift of weight had a location, a shape. She inhaled slowly, exhaled, and pressed the trigger. 1 shot. She shifted 2 inches, listened again. 2nd shot. A half-beat pause. 3rd shot. The gunfire ended before it truly began. On the radio, there was silence. The stunned kind. Bravo team advanced cautiously and found exactly what she had called, 2 sentries and a 3rd setting up to fire from behind cover. All 3 lay still in the dust, weapons fallen where they had been lifted. Kershaw's voice slipped over the net, softer than usual. How the hell did she see them? Nobody answered. For the first time since she had arrived on the base, the laughter that usually chased her didn't come. It wasn't admiration yet, and it wasn't trust. It was something colder, sharper, a dawning recognition that the person they had treated like an experiment might actually see the battlefield in ways they did not. Respect wasn't spoken, but the storm carried the shift through the radios all the same. The storm deepened until the village seemed to dissolve into moving walls of sand. Radios crackled with static, then cleared, then blurred again. Every decision now carried twice the risk. Without Overwatch, they would be fighting blind. Without Overwatch, the hostages would simply vanish. Arya settled tighter into the shallow nest, sand crawling into every seam of her gear. Her world narrowed to wind, breath, and the faint silhouettes that came and went through the thermal wash. She followed movement as if tracking currents underwater, finding patterns where others saw only chaos. "Alpha, hold 2 seconds," she said quietly. They froze. A heartbeat later, an enemy fighter slipped across a rooftop and paused exactly where her crosshairs already rested. 1 shot. The rooftop stayed empty. She shifted again. "Bravo, wait. Right side. 2nd-story window. He's leaning." Her voice carried no drama, no excitement. Just information. Another shot cracked, and the threat disappeared before Bravo had time to call it out. Haldane heard it all. He listened to the timing, the precision, the way her corrections fit the unseen terrain. He started by double-checking each direction, each instruction, as if expecting her to be wrong. But every time she spoke, danger evaporated an instant later. The pattern was undeniable, like someone turning off switches in the dark. "Move left 3 meters, Alpha," she said. "You'll break his angle." They moved. A burst of gunfire ripped through the space they had just vacated. Nobody spoke for a second. Reeves leaned closer to Haldane, his voice low but steady. "She's not lucky. She's experienced. Look at the hit pattern." Haldane glanced at the feed, saw the spread, tight, deliberate, minimal waste. No panic. No spray. He had seen shooters crumble under less pressure than this. But here she was, somewhere alone in the storm, guiding them like she had walked these alleys 100 times. He exhaled, a long, reluctant breath. "Ghost," he said into the radio, using her call sign for the first time. "Call our next move." There was no dramatic pause, no victory in her tone. She simply acknowledged, then continued calmly, layering corrections over chaos. And for a moment, the storm itself seemed to quiet. Not outside, not in the air, but inside the men moving through it. They realized someone up on that ridge understood this nightmare environment in a way none of them did. Someone forged in another storm was shepherding them through this one. The room, the radios, even their hearts went still, not with fear, but with a rare, sudden trust. Inside the compound, pressure peaked the way storms do before they break. Teams moved room to room, clearing corners, calling out numbers, confirming spaces. Somewhere deeper, doors slammed and boots pounded. The enemy commander finally understood the truth. This was not a standoff anymore. It was a race. Arya heard the shift before anyone announced it. The cadence of footfalls changed. Orders snapped sharper. A cluster of heat signatures broke from the main structure and began moving with coordinated urgency. Bodyguards surrounded a central figure, tight formation, rifles outward. They weren't preparing to fight. They were preparing to escape. "Movement North Alley," she said quietly. "Discipline looks different." "That's him." Reeves didn't argue. He relayed the call out to the assault teams, but they were still too far to intercept. The storm swallowed distance, turning yards into miles. If the commander reached the outer vehicles, the mission would fracture into chaos. Arya shifted, feeling the wind press against her cheek, reading the storm as if it had lines printed through it. She began working the escort, not a barrage, not panic, surgical removal. One guard broke slightly wide. She cut him first. The formation tightened. Another hesitated at a doorway. She took him next. The bodyguards adapted, compressing around their leader like moving armor. The commander kept pushing forward. They disappeared beneath a covered walkway for several seconds. Thermals smeared uselessly. Sound bounced strangely off the stone. Arya closed her eyes and listened, tracking rhythm instead of shape. Boots, scuff, breath, turn. She imagined them in motion, how men behave when they think time itself is choking them. They emerged exactly where she expected. She hit the lead guard, then the rear, forcing hesitation, breaking the smooth pace the commander relied on. Suddenly, he was exposed to his own fear. He surged, bolting ahead of the others, instincts overriding discipline. For a heartbeat, no one shielded him. Arya took the shot, but one bodyguard lunged at the last second, throwing himself into the path. The man collapsed. The commander stumbled, then sprinted harder, disappearing between buildings. A truck engine roared to life somewhere in the dust. She shifted again, found the angle. The truck lurched toward the outer gate, bumping, fishtailing through the storm. She couldn't see his face now, just metal, movement, threat. She didn't chase the impossible. She changed tactics. Front tire. One shot. The vehicle jerked, skidded sideways, slammed against a wall. Doors flew open. The commander spilled out, bleeding, driven by the stubborn hope that if he just ran far enough, fate would forget him. He ran toward the rocks at the edge of the compound, toward the very ridge he didn't know she occupied. He slowed at mid-range, chest heaving, turning slightly as if expecting someone ahead. For one still second, the wind dipped. The world narrowed to a quiet center. Arya pressed the trigger. The shot landed with the certainty of something that had been waiting to happen since the first day she arrived. The commander collapsed into the dust, and the storm carried the last of his breath away. "Target down," she said softly. Later, the final numbers would be logged, 27 confirmed. The same number burned into her memory from the day she lost everything that mattered. Only this time, nobody on her side died. This time, 27 meant survival. Inside the compound, the hostages were pulled into the open, shaking but alive. Medics wrapped blankets around shoulders and checked vital signs. Relief traveled across hardened faces like a thaw. Okonjo spotted Arya making her way down from the ridge and crossed the courtyard fast, stopping short, eyes shining in disbelief. "Thank you," he said. Nothing else. Nothing more was needed. Haldane arrived a moment later, dust caked into every crease of his face. He studied her quietly, not as a skeptic now, but as a man taking measure of someone he understood for the first time. He extended his hand. No speech. No qualification. Just a simple gesture, heavy with meaning. She shook it, and they stood there for one breath longer than strangers do. In a world where words were cheap and excuses were plentiful, that unadorned moment was the rarest thing, honest respect. Night settled slowly over the compound, as if even the darkness needed time to believe what had happened. The storm thinned into drifting sheets, and the world regained shape again. Broken walls, scattered brass, the tired faces of men who had expected the worst and somehow found themselves standing in the middle of a miracle that wasn't magic at all, just discipline, timing, and courage. The team gathered near the vehicles, helmets off, breathing hard. The jokes that usually came after operations didn't materialize. No one felt like proving toughness or replaying details for bragging rights. Instead, there was a quiet gratitude that passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that tonight had been as close as it gets. Haldane walked over to Reeves away from the others. His voice stayed low, almost private. He didn't look over his shoulder as he said it. "She's got a place here anytime she wants it." Reeves just nodded. Some statements didn't need ceremony. Arya moved through the courtyard, where the rescued civilians sat wrapped in blankets. They clung to water bottles and each other, their faces streaked with exhaustion and relief. She didn't hover or accept thanks. She simply checked that medics had what they needed, offered a reassuring nod, and kept moving. The number 27 flickered through her mind, not as a weight this time, but as proof that the past didn't have to own the future. 27 meant lives protected. 27 meant lessons learned. The hardest way had finally saved someone else. Later, alone in the small barracks room, she opened a drawer and took out the worn photograph of her old spotter. The edges had curled from handling. The smiles in the picture belonged to a different lifetime, taken before sand and guilt carved new lines into her face. She set the photo on the table and rested her fingertips against it. "I finally brought them all home." The words were not triumphant. They were quiet, almost apologetic, like a promise finally kept. Outside, generators hummed. Somewhere, someone laughed softly, the sound of life returning after fear. Arya sat for a moment longer, not chasing sleep, not chasing ghosts, just breathing. Real strength is rarely loud. Some heroes carry storms in silence and still choose to stand between others and danger. Sometimes the bravest people are the ones nobody believed in, until the moment they saved everyone. Stories like this remind us that courage doesn't always walk into a room wearing medals or demanding attention. Sometimes it looks like a quiet professional who carries heavy memories, shows up anyway, and refuses to quit when the storm closes in. The people who stand watch for others rarely ask to be noticed, but we honor them by remembering what they do. Take a moment to think about the men and women who serve, often far from home, making calm decisions in chaotic places so that others can live. Their sacrifices ripple through families, communities, and generations. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more FOB veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.